And welcome to Otaku No Video. As always, thanks so much for joining me. Today, I've got a primer on the Ghost in the Shell franchise, which a lot of folks know about. They've seen chunks of it here and there, but don't know how all the pieces fit together. So this is also for those of you who've seen maybe the movie, but are wondering how it all works. So it all started with a manga, and one thing a lot of folks don't know is that the original Japanese title does not translate to Ghost in the Shell. It actually translates to roughly to Mobile Armored Riot Police. So back in 1989, Masamune Shirow, who is a famous mangaka and pinup artist, released this manga, Ghost in the Shell. This is actually the 1995 version that was released for American shores. This is the first edition, oddly enough. And you'll notice it's in right-to-left format, Western format. Now, this was done not only with the permission of Masamune Shirow, also with his active involvement. He actually personally went in, flopped all the images to our way of doing things. And, left to right, isn't it? Anyway, he flopped it all and then retouched the artwork. So if someone's supposed to be right-handed and they're holding a gun, and you flop it, he actually redrew it so they're holding it in their right hand. So this is actually a very accurate version of Ghost in the Shell. They cut out one page, basically, of an orgy, basically, which fortunately doesn't really have anything at all to do with the plot. And that was just done because back then in 1995, comics weren't the thing they are today, let's say. So that was considered, okay, let's kind of pull that out. And Shiro was fine with that. They later re-released this with that put back in. So this tells the story, it's set a couple of decades in the future, tells the story of Section 9, which is a special government organization that's basically an anti-terrorist unit. They're sent in where things threaten the public order, and they take out the bad guys. And the people involved are all very, very much cybernetically enhanced. False arms, robotic arms, all sorts of stuff. The main character, Meiji Kusanagi, is a woman who's had her entire body, except for her brain and spinal column, replaced with artificial parts. And so she's fantastically strong, fast, all that kind of stuff, and really, really smart. And this was a very popular manga. The first half, roughly, of the story are self-contained action-adventure detective stories. So something weird's going on, they go in, they investigate, they find out who's doing it, they go and blow them up, basically. And, or take them down. And then it introduces, about halfway in, this rogue AI called the Puppet Master, who is seeking independence, basically, and wants to be recognized as a sentient individual, and starts talking to Meiji Kusanagi about that, and they debate the kind of the morality and the ethics and just the philosophy of what that means, of having a constructed entity that now considers itself sentient. So this was released in 1995, as I mentioned, to coincide with the release of a movie, Ghost in the Shell, directed by Mamoru Oshii. Now, Oshii has a reputation for doing these serious, dramatic, pensive, dark movies. And Ghost in the Shell certainly is that. It has more action than some of his other films. But Ghost in the Shell is more serious, the movie. It has more of this just thoughtful, pensive nature to it, compared to the manga, which is more lighthearted. It has some goofy moments to it, some goofy elements to it, and it just generally has more of an upbeat feel to it. Oshii definitely brought his own feel to the movie. And this is kind of unfortunate because this was so hugely popular, not just in Japan, but internationally when it was released. I mean, this is one of the things that really got folks to know what anime was, and got people to sit up and take notice and say, wow, anime isn't just these flashy cartoons, these weird big eyes. It actually can get deep at times, and it can be complicated. But everyone knew Ghost in the Shell from this dark Oshii version. They didn't know the original. So a little later, a couple of years later, Masamune Shirow wrote a new second manga, Ghost in the Shell 2, The Man-Machine Interface. This is in 1997. And this was essentially the further adventures of Meiji Kusanagi and after the stuff in the original manga. Kind of self-contained, just sort of other stories. Then, about 5 years later, Production I.G decided they wanted to do a TV version of Ghost in the Shell. Now, they had animated the movie, and they said, we like Ghost in the Shell. Let's do a TV show that's more like the early part of the manga. Let's make it more lighthearted and fun. and still have some complexity and some such. So they decided that they were going to basically do it as though the puppeteer, that rogue AI, never shows up. And it's just more of Section 9 dealing with stuff. And they wrote their own storyline of a major, I would say, political problem that arises, and this sort of meme that arises in society, and how Section 9 deals with that. That was called Ghost in the Shell, the Standalone Complex. 26-episode TV show, high budget, great voice acting, everything is just released by Bandai over here. Ooh, if you like Ghost in the Shell, this is it. This is what you were looking for. I love it, obviously. That was 2002. In 2003, Shirow came out with a new manga, Ghost in the Shell 1.5, The Human Error Processor. Now, this was stuff that he originally planned to do in Man-Machine Interface, the second one, and left out for various reasons. So there's just more stuff from Man-Machine Interface. And then a year later, Production I.G released a sequel series to Standalone Complex, Standalone Complex, the second gig. And this is another storyline, although this is Section 9 pushed further. They basically took all the lessons learned from Standalone Complex and told their own big, more complex story. They really did some interesting stuff to Section 9 and second gig. And this was an interesting year for that to happen because Masamune Oshii also released a second Ghost in the Shell movie, Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence. And if you want a dark, rather drab, serious, philosophical, pensive movie, Innocence is the movie for you. It can be beautiful. It's gorgeous, but it's kind of tough to get through in a lot of ways because it's just, there's lots of stuff thrown together, and for me it never really comes together. It's just a bunch of philosophical quotes tossed into a script with beautiful imagery and just stuff. Anyway, that was interesting because Oshii started to get a reputation around that time of being this guy who would put a lot of things into a movie that wouldn't necessarily coalesce into a easily comprehensible story, or even just a cohesive story. Here's a bunch of stuff happening. Anyway, the second gig did rather well. Not quite as well as the first season, but did quite fine. Well enough that Production I.G then made a sequel anime film called Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex Solid State Society. And this is a sequel to second gig, telling the story of Section 9 after the events of second gig. And that's basically what Ghost in the Shell is today. We're a couple of years after Solid State Society. There hasn't been any new Ghost in the Shell stuff for a while. No one seems really interested in doing much more stuff, and it's just kind of run its course. And Ghost in the Shell has never been a really big franchise in terms of content. I mean, 2 TV shows, 2-3 movies, really, a couple of manga. So that's basically Ghost in the Shell. Fun characters, fun premise, fun setup, some depth and complexity, depending on where you are. And overall, definitely worth checking out.